Well, the text today is 3 John. We're wrapping up this series, and 3 John, it really lends itself kind of to just working through it little by little, verse by verse, and just pulling out the principles. Remember that this is the third letter from the Apostle John that we have on record, and it holds to the standard of letter writing form of that day. There's a general greeting, there's a main body, and then there is a conclusion. When I write letters today, the greeting usually contains less words than a letter that would have been written in this day. Letters today, usually, they just contain the recipient's name after the word dear. Or if it's a more formal letter, it may say something like, to whom it may concern. After that, we just kind of get down to business. This is what we're here to write about. This is what we're here to do. But in the Hellenistic age, when this letter was written, letter greetings would often begin with the writer's name or title. That's something that we put at the end of a letter, but then they would put it in the beginning, as well as the recipient's name or title, and then some sort of comment about them or to them or towards them. And I'm reminding you of all of this because I know that as I read this particular letter earlier this week, it didn't seem to have a great flow to it. It didn't seem to have the great flow that we see in other parts of Scripture. It doesn't read like a story does in the fashion of the Gospels or the book of Acts or one of the Old Testament historical books. It doesn't read like poetry in the way of the Psalms or Proverbs. And it doesn't seemingly even contain a lot of theological depth like some of the other New Testament letters have. At face value, it just really appears to be a letter. And that's because that's what it is. So we remember that there was a specific person receiving this letter. There was a specific purpose that he wrote this letter, and it was written to a specific person or recipient. But it has been preserved. It was canonized along with the 65 other books of the Bible. So we have to look at it and we have to ask ourselves, what is contained within this that is relevant for me today? What is here that we need to know about today? So today, that's what we're going to do. We're going to discover what is it in 3 John that the Lord has preserved for us. Starting in verse 1, it says, "The elder to the beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth. Beloved, I pray that all may go well with you, and that you may be in good health, as it goes well with your soul." We don't know a lot about Gaius. This was a pretty common name in the first century, and the name Gaius appears in 4 other occasions in the New Testament other than just this one, but there's not really any solid reason to believe that this Gaius is one of those Gaiuses. Now, to be fair, there's no reason to believe that it's not, but we just don't really have any proof. So the reality is that we just don't know specifically who this guy is or what his role is. I assume, based off of the content that is going to follow in this letter, that he holds some sort of leadership position in the church, because the things that John is telling him, they seem to be something that you would give instruction to somebody that had leadership in the church. What we do know is that Gaius is someone John loved. He is someone that John had cared for in his time of ministry. He's someone that John spent time in prayer for. And what was John's prayer? He prayed for good physical health and good spiritual health there in verse 2. And this reminds me of the story out of Mark chapter 2, where there are these 4 friends who they have a friend that is paralyzed, and they believe that this Jesus who's been teaching and who's been performing miracles, he's the guy that they can take him to. He's the guy that can do something about their friend's ailment. And so they go to the house that Jesus is teaching in, but they can't get through the door. There's so many people gathered there. There's so many people crowded there that they can't get through the door. So they haul him up on the roof. They tear a hole in the roof, and then they lower him down to the place where Jesus was teaching him. And Jesus looked at him, and he looked at the friends up above him, and he said, "Friend, your sins are forgiven." And now he went on and he healed the man physically as well, but Jesus understood that spiritual health is the most important. And in John's letter to Gaius, I think he's just simply saying, this is what I pray for you, that your spiritual health would thrive as well as your physical health. But it brings about this important reality for us. Our spiritual health does not need to be neglected while our physical health is thriving. We should not make the gym a priority while neglecting time in prayer and in the Word. Now, one could make an argument that the opposite is true also, and I think that we should steward our physical body as a gift and a vehicle that God has given us to glorify Him, but let's not chase after vain things like big muscles or flat stomachs while neglecting what really matters the most, our spiritual health. John, in his letter opening, continues in verse 3, "For I rejoiced greatly when the brothers came and testified to your truth, as indeed you are walking in the truth." The brothers that John is talking about is this group of itinerant believers who are traveling around the region doing ministry work. They're traveling around preaching. They're traveling around making disciples. They're trying to bring people into the flock. And as they have visited Gaius, they brought word back to John that Gaius was walking in the truth. He was living according to the way. Most of you have heard me talk about Jeff Blair before. He's a mentor of mine. He pastors the church in Locust Grove that I was on staff for over 6 years. They're also the church that most generously helped to get Horizon started. And occasionally I'll see a face from Locust Grove, because it's only about an hour away. Occasionally I'll see a face from Locust Grove walk through our doors on a Sunday morning, and then later in the week, Jeff will send me a text message about what those people said, what they reported. Because he's a pastor, because he's busy on Sundays, has never actually had the opportunity to come here and visit on a Sunday, but he is still invested in what we're doing. And if I can speak from the perspective of Gaius, it feels really good when he says, "I am proud of you guys." It is not that I need the affirmation, but he is someone that I respect a lot, and he has greatly impacted my life. And to know that he feels like his investment is paying dividends in the kingdom is encouraging, and quite frankly, that helps me to move through the more discouraging moments when I know that he's encouraged by what God is doing through his investment in Horizon Church. And now not only is John encouraged about what he's hearing about Gaius, but I would bet that Gaius is encouraged by John's written word as well. John finishes the greeting by sharing his joy. Verse 4 says, "I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth." Here's another indicator that Gaius is someone John cares deeply for. He has repeatedly called those affected by his ministry his children. And Gaius is no different. He counts Gaius among his spiritual children. I've been involved in ministry long enough to know that discipleship can be cyclical. It can be these things that just kind of comes, it ebbs and it flows. You may have some people that you disciple for decades, but you may also have some people that you only disciple for just a short period of time. In either case, we have to take advantage of the time that God has given us to pour into a person's life, to help them flourish, to help them grow in their faith. Bree and I have had a lot of students over the years. And at one point in time, we were very involved with their spiritual formation. But as we moved out and stepped into planting a church, and as they graduated high school and got married and stayed there or moved somewhere else, just as our lives took us to different places in different seasons, we weren't as involved in their spiritual formation as we once were. And what we have seen is that most often someone else will walk into their life and will pick up right where we left off. Those students, even though they may not necessarily be as much of a part of our lives, and as we may not be as much a part of discipling them as we once were, they never really leave your heart. They're always kind of there. And so when we get to catch up with them, I caught up with a young man 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe a month ago. We sat in the lobby and he just told me all that God was doing in his heart. And it was just so encouraging, and it just brings such joy to hear what God is doing through those that you have been able to have some sort of impact, that you've had some amount of time to disciple. Well, this is what John is describing here. He's heard that Gaius is walking in the truth, and that brings him joy. We often hear this verse quoted by parents, and although that's not specifically what John was referring to here, there really is nothing greater as a parent than to know that your kids are walking with the Lord, that they're growing into the person that the Lord wants them to be. When I am an old man, I'm not going to care what sports my kids played. I'm not going to care what their GPA was or what college they did or didn't go to or even what career they chose. I'm going to care that they are walking in the truth and that their kids are walking in the truth and that their kids are walking in the truth and that their kids will be walking in the truth. We have this picture at our house, and I don't remember who took it, of the moment that Carter was baptized. And whenever he raised up out of the water, somebody took a picture of that, and you can see the joy on Carter's face, but Bree and I are both in the picture too, and you can just see the joy on our face. Because that's a significant moment in his faith journey. It's so evident. I don't know what children you may have in your life. Maybe you have some people that you have discipled, or maybe it's the children that live in your home with you. Either way, I hope that you are praying for their spiritual life and praying for opportunities to pour into them so that someday you can have this same joy that John writes about. As John moves into the body of the letter, he compares and contrasts three individuals and the conduct that they have in leadership. Specifically, he deals with how they have received and partnered with these itinerant ministers. First, John talks about Gaius, who is, again, the recipient of this letter. In verse 5, he says, "Beloved, it is a faithful thing you do in all your efforts for these brothers, strangers as they are, who testified to your love before the church. You will do well to send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God. For they have gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from the Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support people like these, that we may be fellow workers for the truth." Essentially, John says, hey, you're doing good, young man. But what is it that is so endearing about his conduct? What is it that Gaius is doing that he likes so much? Well, the text says that even though these people were strangers who Gaius didn't know, he received them, and he loved them, and he sent them out in a worthy manner. In just a few verses, we'll read something that suggests that these men came with the blessing and endorsement of John's apostolic authority. Last week, we spoke about keeping watch over who gets teaching authority in our lives and in our churches from 2 John. Here in 3 John, he is saying, "But listen, there are some who do speak the truth, who are doing the Lord's work. Be hospitable towards them." John's suggestion is not to backtrack on what he wrote in 2 John. Again, we have to remember that this is a letter, and it is written to a different person altogether than 2 John. But one thing that this does help us to accomplish is it helps there to not be an overcorrection. It is possible that in light of 2 John that we read last week, that we can gatekeep with too much rigidity. And John doesn't want that to happen. He wants us to live by the truth. He wants us to use discernment. He wants us to make wise decisions and in the appropriate time and manner to support the ministries that lead to gospel multiplication and support the ministers that have strong theology and pure motivation. John used the phrase, "send them on their journey in a manner worthy of God." The understanding here is to send them out as if this were God himself going out to the field, being sent out into ministry. And he says we need to send them out in that sort of manner. He said that they accepted nothing from the Gentiles. Most scholars agree that the term Gentiles is not referring to non-Jews, that is, as we most traditionally understand it. But in this context, it means anyone that is not a part of God's family, anyone that is not calling themselves a Christ follower. In this case, it means anyone who doesn't follow Jesus. They didn't make a habit of asking people outside of God's family to do what should be done by the church. John says that's our job. That's our responsibility. That's how we get to be fellow workers with them. As a church, we practice tithing. Every month, we take 10% of what our people give, and we send it back to Kingdom Ministries. Directly, we have supported ministries and missionaries in Italy, Mexico, and Africa. Indirectly, through our partnership with We Start Churches, we have supported the ministry work of church plant and church planters in Gilbert, Arizona, Desert Rock, Arizona, Florence, Arizona, Chula Vista, California, San Diego, California, Irvine, California, Muldrow, Oklahoma, Granite City, Illinois, Florissant, Missouri, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Ypsilanti, Michigan, Fredericksburg, Virginia, Burlington, Vermont, and Tokyo, Japan. Indirectly, with our partnership with OKIM, we support missionaries in India, the Ivory Coast, France, Panama, Japan, Thailand, and even a missions training program that's actually in North Carolina. Why am I telling you all of this? Well, it's not to toot our own horn. We've done nothing but be obedient to give to the things that God has ordained us to give to, what He has allowed us to give towards. It's to help us see that the world that God loves and the world that Jesus died for is much, much bigger than just what we see contained in the walls of Horizon Church. There is work to be done for the Great Commission, and we ought to support those who are doing it in places that we can't go to, that we are not called to go to. And I'm also telling you this to say thank you. It's because you've been generous that we can support these types of works. My hope is that in the future we can take that 10% and we can bump it to 20%, maybe even 50% someday. As long as people are answering the call to go, then we ought to answer the call to send. As we move on, John is going to bring up another person. He's going to bring him to our attention, and he stands directly opposite of Gaius in terms of support and hospitality. Look what he said in verse 9. I have written something to the church, but Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. So if I come, I will bring up what he is doing, talking wicked nonsense against us. And not content with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers and also stops those who want to and puts them outside of the church. Diotrephes is another person that we really don't know anything about. He evidently has some authority in some church, or at least he believes he has some authority in some church. It is possible that he bullied his way to a place that nobody put him. All we really know is that John does not care for the way that he's treating these outsiders, and he doesn't care that he is a very prideful person. We know nothing of the letter written to the church that John mentioned. Most scholars have suggested, and I believe rightly so, that we just don't have this letter. We don't know where it's at. There's not any evidence that John is referring to one of his other two canonized letters. We don't know if the church never received the letters or if Diotrephes maybe destroyed the letters upon arrival, or if it's just been ignored and nobody seems to be able to do anything about it. We don't know anything about the letter. All we know is that this is not a new issue with Diotrephes. John has written about this before. He's recognized this problem and tried to do something about it before. Where Gaius' leadership is commended for his character and conduct, Diotrephes' leadership is rebuked. Diotrephes is prideful. He wants to be first. And it's not that surprising that pride is how Satan begins to sow discord in the church. Don't you know that Satan hates the church? He doesn't want to see the church succeed, so he does what he's always done. He gets people's pride to come alive, to swell up. Pride is the original sin. It was pride that made Lucifer want to be like God and eventually led to his removal from the angelic rank. It was pride that Satan fed to Adam and Eve to tell them that they could know what God knows and that they could be in charge of their own lives. Pride has always been an issue that Satan likes to use against the people of God. The book of Proverbs says that pride comes before the fall. So it's not really any surprise that Satan swells up the head of Diotrephes. It isn't any surprise that Diotrephes wants to be first. He wants to be number one. He wants to be the head honcho. But leaders should take the instruction that Paul gave to the Philippians. He wrote in Philippians chapter 2, verse 3, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others." Leaders should take the example of Jesus, who said in Mark chapter 10, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And not only was Diotrephes prideful, wanting to be first, he wasn't respectful of John's authority as an apostle. Leaders should recognize that they also have people that God has placed in leadership positions above them, and they should respect and honor those people. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 7 says, "Remember your leaders, those who spoke to you the word of God. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate that faith." A few verses down, also in Hebrews 13, "Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as they who will have to give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you." In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, it says, "We ask you, brothers, to respect those who labor among you and are over you in the Lord and admonish you, and to esteem them very highly in love because of their work. Be at peace among yourselves." In God's kingdom, we are encouraged to honor those that he has placed in leadership over us. This is evidently something that Gaius did well, but Diotrephes did not. It says that he spoke wicked nonsense. And I think this brings up a trap that every one of us can fall into if we aren't careful. Respecting our leaders doesn't only come in front of their faces in our conversation with them. They should also be respected behind their backs. And I hope that you know that I am not telling you this as your pastor demanding undying allegiance. The truth is that I have spiritual authorities in my life as well, and I must submit to them. I must respect them. It would be inappropriate for me to disrespect them to their faces, but it would also be inappropriate for me to spread discourse behind their backs. That's a really easy way to damage the kingdom and to kill a church, whispering among ourselves about the things that we don't like, or the things we don't agree with, or the things that we think our leaders are not doing correctly. To be clear, I am not suggesting that we blindly follow wicked and foolish leaders. We have to use discernment when it comes to who we follow. If, however, we determine that there is a leader and a teacher worthy of the calling as the Bible describes them, we should follow them with respect for the position that God has placed them in. Finally, John said of Diotrephes that he is unwelcoming to other Christians, and he is inhospitable to those who do want to be welcoming to them. It seems like Diotrephes has an issue with other Christians trying to come in and do work on what he believes is his turf. But newsflash, it's not his turf. It's God's turf, and he can use whoever he chooses to minister wherever he chooses in whatever means he does choose. In finalizing the meat of this letter, John brings up one final person who, like Gaius, is commendable. Verse 11 says, "Beloved, do not imitate evil, but imitate good. Whoever does good is of God. Whoever does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone, and from the truth itself. We also add to our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true." Demetrius is another person that, again, we don't know much about, but John is telling Gaius that Demetrius has a good reputation. Demetrius' reputation, it isn't just good from John's perspective, it's good from everyone's perspective. Demetrius, it is an example of good that John tells Gaius you should imitate. Given the choice between the example of Diotrephes, who is prideful, disobedient, and inhospitable, or Demetrius, who we have to assume is humble and submissive and welcoming, John says Demetrius is the one to imitate. He is the good that you should imitate. Don't imitate evil like Diotrephes, imitate good like Demetrius. You know, as a parent, I know that there are kids that my children will watch and they will imitate. And maybe these are some kids that are a little bit older, maybe around the same age, but it's just the reality of life. We begin to imitate those that we have respect for. And honestly, adults, we do the same thing. But as a parent, I pray that my kids will have examples who lead more like Demetrius than Diotrephes, who will do more good than evil, who will show my kids an honorable way rather than a dishonorable way. But let me just ask you this morning, who are you imitating? Who has the most influence in your life? Not just in terms of pride, obedience, and hospitality, but in all areas, who has the loudest voice in your life? That's something we all should consider, myself included. And then John concludes his letter much in the same way that he concluded 2 John. I had much to write to you, but I would rather not write with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon. We will talk face to face. Peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends, each by name. Last week I pointed out that we were made for community. We were made to be physically present in Christian fellowship and worship. And John points that out here in 3 John as well. But I love the addition at the end. Greet the friends by name. You know, people love it when you remember their name, don't they? According to Andy Bernard, name repetition is the way that you get ahead in life. And I want you to imagine with me, here in about 40, 50 years, I'm retired, I've invested well, I invented something great. I'm sitting on a beach in Tahiti, or probably more likely a mountain. I don't care for the beach much. And I think, I'm going to write a letter to my friends back at Horizon Church. You all have a new pastor at this point. He's doing a great job. But I write a letter and say, will you read this to the people? And I say, hey, at the end, I want you to say, Lacey, Josh says hi. Echo, Josh says hi. Hope you're doing well. Kinsey, Josh says hello. Hope things are going well for you. I suspect that you would enjoy that I remember you by name, and that your new pastor remembers your name and cares enough to say it. I think that John understands the personal connection that comes when we use each other's names. I know it's hard to remember people's names sometimes, but do you know what I do to try and remember people's names? If I don't remember, I just ask, and I just try to get a little bit better the next time. I know that for some of us, remembering names can be really difficult. And so I just ask. I tell them, hey, I really want to remember your name, so would you mind telling it to me once again? I'm going to try to do a better job. And eventually it just sticks. And just like that, 3 John comes to an end. And just like that, this series, Light and Love, is coming to an end. But I want you to remember the title, Light and Love. Into the darkness, Jesus steps to bring light and take away sin. And into the darkness, we can step to spread love and reflect his light. After all, in one verse, Jesus said, I am the light. And in another verse, he said, you are the light. So which is it? Well, it's both. Just like the sun is the source of light and the moon reflects that light, Jesus is the source of light, and we are called and equipped to reflect that light. But how do we do that? How do we reflect the light? Well, just from what we learned today, we love others. We lay down our pride. We humble ourselves. That's what Jesus did in his ministry. That's what he did in his death. We respect those that the Lord has given spiritual authority to. That's what Jesus did when he sought the Father's will. In a difficult moment, he sought the Father's will and not his own. First, we respect his authority, and then we discern and respect the authority that he's given to other spiritual leaders. And third, we practice hospitality. Well, that's what Jesus did when he welcomed sinners into his family. I mean, do you remember reading through the Gospels and the people that Jesus said, come and follow me, or the people that Jesus sat down at a table with and enjoyed a meal with? The Pharisees are standing back going, how could he? But Jesus was hospitable towards these people, and he continues to do so as he welcomes sinners into his home. So let's be welcoming people. Let's be sending people. And if we do these things, I believe that the impact of Horizon Church and the legacy that we each individually will leave behind will be one of kingdom impact. You know, I just don't want to get to the end of my life and people say, well, you know, he had a nice home. Well, you know, he was pretty funny sometimes. Or whatever people would say. I want people to say, he loved the Lord. He made a real impact for the kingdom. None of these other things matter. And so I believe if we do these things, that our impact will be a kingdom impact. It'll be an important impact. It'll be an impact of something that matters. Let's pray.